Hello and welcome to Thursdays for the Soul. My name is Jennifer White and I am your host today. This webinar series is for the whole church. We faithfully focus on care and education for the people of God and create opportunities to digitally worship together as the whole of the United Church of Christ. From prayer, music, and psalms to interviews of key leaders and how-tos in congregational life, this series stays current to the relevant topics of the time and offers opportunities of connection in the wider church and in your community. Together, we can bring our church and the world towards the world God imagined for all of us. In this series, Thursday, July 28th, we'll have a conversation with Franklinton Centers at BRICS, Reverend Ellie Mendez Angulo. Join us for a conversation with her as the program manager and interim executive director, who will share the history, the UCC connection, and current vision of Franklinton Center to manifest a world where systematic oppression does not exist. The whole divinity of a person is realized, the memory, the contribution, and the resilience of our ancestors is embraced, and the environment is healed. Thursday, August 4th, we'll have faithful abortion access and the end, then and now. The clergy consultation service was a nationwide network of getting people together for access to safe abortion services and resources before it was legal. Hosted by Reverend Dr. Chris Davies, joined alongside authors D.A. Dirks and Patricia Ralph to learn more about the extensive network of the time and hear testimony from Reverend Donna Shaper and her work along the way. Faith Choice Ohio Executive Director Elena Ramsey will join alongside Dr. Sherry Warren, the United Church of Christ Minister of Gender Justice, in speaking towards the people of faith can show up now and that we can look towards mounting state-led barriers to abortion access. As usual, you can visit ucc.org or any of our social media platforms to find out about upcoming sessions just like this. My friends, my beloveds, if conversations like this move you, if what's offered here today enhances your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ. You can do that by texting UCC to 41444. Your prayerful and financial support helps programs just like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for all that you do. Today's program is part of a special series of the Thursdays for the Soul webinars. We focused on 12 Just World Covenant programs in the United Church of Christ. Today, we will hear from several members of congregations that have participated in Our Faith, Our Vote campaign and learn about their stories. Friends, I'd like to introduce you to the director of the Washington, D.C. office of the United Church of Christ, Sandy Silverson.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you, all of you, for taking time out of your busy July Thursday afternoon to be with us, and for those who will be able to join at another point. So very grateful to have you here with us, and it's no exaggeration to say that there's a lot happening in the world, and so all the more reason for us to be gathered together. I have to laugh at myself because the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign, I'll share a little bit about the history after I introduce my guests, but the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign began in 2004. And pretty much every election cycle, midterm and presidential since then, I have declared this is a pivotal election season. And I don't feel any differently this time than I did the last several election cycles. It really is a pivotal election season. There's so much at stake for all we have to do is take a quick scan of the headlines and realize just how very much is at stake, including our planet, our community lives, our bodies, so much more. And so I'm delighted to have two wonderful colleagues of mine from the United Church of Christ, who have been part of the United Church of Christ Our Faith, Our Vote campaign in past years. And I'm very excited about this this particular conversation because we'll have a chance to hear both from a local church pastor from somebody on the conference staff of Central Atlantic Conference. And so I'm excited to have that back and forth between those different settings of the church. And it is our hope that we might be able to kind of model some new ways of being in partnership with each other as the national setting, as conferences and associations, and as local congregations. And so hopefully in the course of this course of this conversation, you'll get a sense of how that might emerge, and hopefully it will bubble up some ideas for you about things that you might want to try in your regions and your areas. So I'm so grateful to be joined by Reverend Marvin Silver. Marvin and I go back a long way. We have been friends for quite a long time. Marvin serves on the conference staff of the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ, which is my home conference here in Washington, D.C. He serves the eastern region of D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, stretching south to Richmond and Chesterfield. Reverend Silver works to maintain a climate of pastoral care through guidance and support of clergy, local churches, and peer-to-peer pastoral support networks. And he organizes and mobilizes the expertise and leadership of professional networks for church development and congregational vitality, in keeping with the conference New Visions ministry. In addition, as if that weren't enough, Reverend Silver serves as the primary contact person for the Central Atlantic Conference ministry team, Justice and Witness Ministries. More than just responding to social injustices, Reverend Silver is transforming the conference's paradigm and approach to the work of justice by building a new justice movement based on a vision, mission, and set of core principles that defines and unites local churches, clergy, and justice leaders into a powerful, effective, and faithful organizing network. And Marvin's work as part of Faithful Democracy within that has been a substantial part of this work, and we'll have a chance to hear a bit more from Marvin about that work and some of the things that he has been doing. And then I'm also deeply delighted to be joined by Reverend Emily Kolp Ashby. Reverend Ashby is the designated pastor at St. Paul's Community United Church of Christ in Cleveland. And it's an urban church located in Cleveland. She also serves on the board of the UCC Disabilities Ministries. She graduated from the Candler School of Theology at Emory University and was ordained in 2021. And she is the mother of 2 small children. And so I am just delighted to have both Reverend Silver and Reverend Ashby Kolp with us. And with that, I will just begin with a brief introduction to tell you a little bit about where Our Faith, Our Vote arose. How did we get to this? How did we come to this point? And then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to hear their stories about some of the things that they've tried, some of the ways that they've engaged in this campaign. So the United Church of Christ has historic roots in the practice of engaging the public sphere and the political dialogue with new ideas, prophetic witness, and bold strategies for justice. The Our Faith, Our Vote project was initiated in 2004 on the shoulders of that work. It places issues of racial justice, classism, economic justice, gender justice, environmental justice, peace and social equality in the forefront of elections through education and organizing of our churches. The Our Faith, Our Vote campaign uses a 3-tiered approach of voter registration, issues education, and mobilizing for voter participation. And in recent years, protecting the right to vote. It encourages UCC members and congregations to look critically from a faith perspective at the issues and candidates in the elections, and invites people of faith to engage in respectful, responsible dialogue and make informed decisions about the elections. Churches are encouraged to establish forums for considering key issues and reflecting on the importance of nonpartisan faith participation in local, state, and national election year activities. And the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign is really rooted in our General Synod witness, and recalls the 11th General Synod of our United Church of Christ, which affirms the work of the church in equipping the saints for the task of prophetic ministry within the biblical tradition. And it invites the various settings of the church to pursue this ministry by providing voter registration, public hearings, and policy issues, and encouraging participation in the political process. So that was back from our 11th General Synod, speaking very prophetically today's time. So here we are in the 2022 midterms with so much at stake and so much happening. And so I want to begin right away, launching right into our conversation with our two guests. And it's our hope that you will hear some ideas that spark your imagination for you and your congregation and your local community. So I'm going to begin, Emily. I'd like to begin with you, and I'll go over to you, Marvin. How did you find out about the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign?
I was trying to remember, and I think it was in an email, perhaps. I think I saw in the UCC kind of the emails that go out, and I saw it, and actually I had already been doing some work on the ground, and then thought, oh, it can actually be funded. Well, that's yeah.
Wonderful. And Marvin, how did you find out about the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign? And we're going to go back in time a little bit here, right?
Yeah, I think you got that correct. So yeah, excited when we were on national staff together. It was sort of a joy and a challenge that we were part of the team that helped to develop the Our Faith, Our Vote program back in 2004. And yes, you're correct. I can remember almost every election. We always say, this is the most critical election in our time, and we're saying it at every election season. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah, when we began sort of reshifting our work here in the Central Atlantic Conference, it was just timely for us because we had just launched our new justice movement called the Justice and Witness Action Network in the fall of 2019 at our annual meeting, and we were getting ready for the 2020 election. So it was important for us to bring together our local churches, our clergy, and the justice leaders across the conference to be unified around a set of priorities and a goal to impact the electoral process, and to do that, of course, in a nonpartisan way.
Great, wonderful. So Emily, my next question, having heard about the Our Faith, Our Vote campaign, what led you to think this could be a really great path of engagement for my particular congregation? And please feel free to speak, kind of to the specifics of your congregation in St. Paul's. Was there something that you thought, this could really resonate? And how was that process of introducing this to the congregation? Were folks initially enthusiastic? Were there some roadblocks? What was that like?
I think at the time, and I still do, I see the Our Faith, Our Vote as an extension of what the work of what St. Paul's has always been engaged in. And so in that case, it was kind of an easy extension of it. The biggest thing, so St. Paul's is an urban congregation, and we have connected with the church an outreach center, and that is its own 501c3 that is under the umbrella of the church. And the focus of this outreach center is to reach out to the underhoused individuals in the area. It's always seen in this area a large population of people that kind of live right there on the margins. So our outreach center has always provided assistance with vouchers and IDs. So for individuals that are needing to get that driver's license and social security card, that we provide a voucher for them to go and take, and then to get the ID card that they need. And then we provide assistance with filling out the application form. And so the ID card is one of the first steps that you need in order to vote. So already that was built into our program. The other thing that we've always done is our church is a mail drop for individuals that don't have a permanent address. Then they use our church. And so it's a lot of mail that often official mail from the Social Security Administration that is coming to those people. And we don't open it, we just set it aside for them. And so they come into the church and collect it. And that is something that's, completely allowed to do we're in Ohio, so under the state of Ohio. And so it was always pretty easy then that we, as a way to get people registered, to say, you can use our church as a physical address. So it was, and then the other thing that we've always done is just being there for individuals as they're seeking information. So it was just an extension to say, don't forget, this election is coming up, and then providing information about how to get registered and how to vote. And at this point in time, this was the 2020 election is when we first really got engaged. It was my first year in the church, and also, a pandemic. And so everything at that point in time, it has for, the past 2 years, just felt so different. And there weren't a lot of the, mass gatherings of people to kind of go out and register the vote. So we had to find creative ways to engage. And one of the creative solutions that our church didn't come up with, it was actually, I saw in the neighborhood, it was a group of community members started organizing, to help voter information. And what they decided to do. And I think this is an idea I've seen elsewhere, but it was really big in Cleveland, and that was to use real estate boxes. Often those signs that stick in the yard that say, this house for sale, and then there's a little box on the front in which you can pick up information. So they attached to these boxes a sign that had a QR code for people, to click on and then find information, accurate information about where and how to vote. And then in the box, we supplied an application to register to vote and registration. So so at this point in time, I kind of connected with these community members that had started to mobilize and said, hey, you know what? I think I've got some people at church that can help with this. So we helped place several of those boxes and then kept them stuffed, with the information. And then there were small things that we did as well. Attached to those, you need a stamp to send back in. Well, you're legally not allowed to already fix a stamp on there. So we would just say, okay, we'll come into the building and we'll give you a stamp. And that we were somehow legally allowed to do. It was one of those loopholes. I think it couldn't be seen we couldn't stick a stamp on there because it would be seen somehow to pay for people's votes. But if someone would say, hey, I have this letter, I want to send it, so we could give them a stamp, those kinds of things. And then, we had those boxes, we also felt it useful to connect with the people, where they were. So we had a couple programs that were already running that we just started going to community members that were coming into the church and helping to get them registered. And then through that, giving them accurate information.
That there's so many amazing pieces in that story, Emily. I mean, one is just like the importance of providing registration options for people, across the spectrum of socioeconomic status. And I also particularly really love the way that you use the services that your congregation was already engaged in. So you didn't really necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. You already had services for the unhoused and for others. And so through those, you were able to incorporate the proponents of Our Faith, Our Vote. So registration, issue education, helping people, understand, how to vote, where to vote, what was at stake. So those are wonderful, I think, things for other congregations to think about, is that there's already these ready-made avenues that we already have in our congregations and communities to engage this work. Marvin, I want to ask you something similar in terms of how you've engaged, and I know you've engaged both congregations and on the conference level, so you are able to speak from those two places. One thing that I think you and I have both heard quite a lot of is, the church really should not be doing something political. We can't really get involved in the political process. And so I'm wondering how you have spoken to that over the years, and in what ways have you found it? What ways have you found to help people kind of overcome that hurdle, whether it's in a local church setting or on the conference level, to be able to engage in nonpartisan election work?
Sure, great question, Sandy, and great work, Emily. I appreciate it, hearing a lot about that. So yeah, in the context of our Faith and Democracy campaign, when we first launched it back in 2020, I think we termed it Faith and Democracy specifically because we wanted to talk about the importance of who we are as people of faith, and we're called to do the work of justice, that we're called to be a people of justice. And that one of the most important issues and roles that we have to play in the context of a growing democracy is to make sure that everyone takes advantage of their right to vote, to use their voice, to decide who they want to be their representative in regards to serving in elected office. And that we can do that in a nonpartisan fashion. IRS gives us some do's and don'ts of how we can do that. But then it's important for us as the faith community to know how we should be able to do that as well, in the context of having conversations, safe spaces to have conversations around current political issues that are happening, but also to educate our network, which we've focused on a lot since 2020, which is to recognize that the gospel is political and that theology is not an abstract exercise. It is about life and death. And that one of the most fundamental roles that we could play in the context of social service as local churches is to make sure that people are registered to vote, make sure that people understand who the elected officials are, those who are running for office, make sure that they understand and have knowledge of the issues, because oftentimes many of us go to the polls not knowing who or the position of the elected officials or those who are running for office, as well as the issues in and of themselves in our communities. And then also the importance of making sure people follow through after they've registered to vote, to then go and actually cast their vote and to protect that vote, which is an important work that we are called to do as well, making sure people aren't disenfranchised when we look at sort of the reemergence of new ways in which voter suppression is limiting people's ability to cast their right to vote. So we've been able to do that effectively in our Faith and Democracy campaign back in 2020, especially in the midst of a pandemic. We still were able to be quite effective.
Wonderful. I so appreciate that. And I really appreciate that that understanding of our lives, our faith lives are political, that politics, when you really think about what politics is about the policies we put into place, the laws we put into place, the systems that order our common life. And when we look at the scripture, from the Hebrew scripture to the Christian scripture, it's all about how are we ordering our common life? Are we in right relationship with each other?
Exactly.
And if we're not in right relationship with each other, then that impacts our relationship with God. And so really, when we think about politics, it's really about how we order our common life. And for us as Christians, as people of faith, are we ordering our life in a way that's true to our understanding of the gospel vision of wholeness for all of God's creation? And so I really appreciate that. And I often help tell people there's a difference between political and partisan. So
exactly.
we are all political beings because we all live
Exactly.
together, and we all have to arrange our lives together. But we don't have to be partisan. And that's one of the amazing, unique gifts of the faith community, is that we bring a perspective to these kinds of questions that supersedes ideology, partisanship. It goes well beyond that. And I'm just thinking to a quote that Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, who's part of the Faith United to Save Democracy, says, there are still too many people in the faith community who view voter engagement as political and forget that if justice is God's business, it is surely ours.
Right.
I really appreciate.
I think another good point you're making, Sandy, is that, we're not only called to be political, yet not partisan, but we're also called to be prophetic. And oftentimes we have heard in the local churches, even in the midst of our Central Atlantic Conference, some of our churches are indifferent to our engagement in this type of work. And, we have to remind them that prophetic does not mean partisan, political does not mean partisan. It means trying to sort of live out who we're called to be as disciples of Jesus Christ.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Being prophetic is about speaking truth to power, not necessarily speaking for a particular political party. That's
or a candidate.
That's right. So Emily, I'm curious to hear a little bit more from you. So I loved hearing about the stories about ways that you could engage your community. And as we're speaking about, the prophetic angle of all of this work, for you in Cleveland, maybe you can say a little bit about what was particularly important about the ways that you engaged your community that maybe helped the larger community of Cleveland kind of understand some of the more systemic problems of the city and the surrounding area.
Well, Cleveland is like a lot of major cities in that it has very, very low voter turnout. Actually, I saw in the last election, it was, I think 16% of eligible voters voted. That's too low. That's abysmal. And a lot of that is because it's not because people don't want to vote. It's because there's not an access to voting. They either don't have the information, or they don't have a way to get there, or they don't have a means to get there. Yeah. So overall, I see voting as it's a justice issue, because it comes down to accessibility. And St. Paul's, because of where we're located and based on just the general our community, the population that we live with, is really profoundly mostly affected by this lack of accessibility. Mostly it's either a lack of information, it's a lack of, honestly, if you are, most of your day-to-day life is just getting through, trying to just,
that's right,
get your self from place to place. It's trying to get enough money to, get lunch. It's trying to find childcare for your child.
Exactly.
And we do not have time, or really the mindset, to be able to
Right.
think of anything beyond that framework. So a lot of it is, we can't expect them. We kind of have to go to them and say,
Yes.
hey, and a lot of that, by us going to them, that is saying, you matter.
Yes.
You have a voice in this. That's the beauty of a democracy, is that it equalizes all of our voices. And so St. Paul's, by the nature of who we are, we emphasize being in relationship. And we've always emphasized finding the dignity, and recognizing, raising up the dignity of those who are most marginalized. So this was just a piece of it. It was a way for us to say, we see you, your vote matters. So that was, I think, the most important thing was going to the people and finding out what those barriers were, and then working to eradicate the barriers. So, we mentioned lack of information. It was simple things like, finding a ride to the polls. So, we can organize, if one of our congregational members are going to the polls, take this person as well. It was as simple. I mentioned stamps before, because actually that was kind of big.
Absolutely.
If you've got your mail-in voter application, well, and you don't have a stamp, because a lot of times underhouse people aren't going to carry stamps with them, then it's another trek to go to the post office to get the stamp. So, things like that we could just help to eradicate those barriers. And honestly, just having people available for where people already were. So at community meals, we had people that were kind of stationed at libraries. We had a couple people from church go to the library and just be there to help with people walking through the application process, or the voter registration process. We did have someone available for translation. Specifically, was just someone in our congregation that spoke Spanish, and we said, so you can be available. So it's those kind of things of utilizing the tools that we already have.
Yes.
And then working with the people that we already know to eradicate the barriers that exist in their lives. And honestly, for me, what motivates me as a pastor in my role is relationships. So I think when it's always been an important issue for me is voting and taking that civic responsibility that we have. But then, and listening to people and finding out that this is not equal access, that it bothered me. It bothered me a lot. And I thought, like, if there's just a little bit that St. Paul's can do to just get, one more person, and not even to vote, but just to recognize that their vote matters. Because if they vote in this election, they're more likely to vote in the future.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I so appreciate that both you, Emily, and Marvin, talk about the recognition of human dignity and worth in the vote. I mean, it is our voice. It is our way of saying, this is what I would like to see happen in the world, and especially for people who are marginalized and who will have even a harder time casting that vote. It's even more important for them to be able to say, food insecurity is something I want the candidates to address these things. And the way we do that is through our voice and our vote. And so I think that idea of just the sacredness, the importance of the vote as really, recognition of our human worth and dignity and our participation in community is just so very powerful and hugely important. Marvin, I want to ask you a little bit. I think a lot about John Lewis's quote that that voting is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have for social change. And I know, as you've been doing quite a lot of work through the conference with the Justice and Ministry Network, and I know you've worked on a variety of issues, including mass incarceration and quite a few others. I'm wondering how you reflect on that quote from John Lewis, and how does that resonate with you in terms of some of the particular issues that you've engaged in with the Central Atlantic Conference?
Yeah, what we do through our Faith and Democracy campaign, and particularly this year, is we've been reminding folks about the importance of our vote continuing to be a powerful tool for change in spite of the forces that seek to suppress it, and to persuade us to vote against our own best interests by focusing on issues that are not at the root cause of the problems in our community. So we do it through that way in particular, and also try to make sure that we actualize voting for individual members in the local church, to let them know that, hey, collectively you can come together as a power base, it's a local church, to not just vote your conscience, but also vote from a perspective of faith in regards to your understanding of justice and who we are called to be as a people of justice. But how do you organize yourself in collaboration with other UCC churches within your state region to have an impact on making sure that people are informed about the electoral process, making sure that they know the voting laws, what they need to do and what they need to be prepared for in the context of going to the polls, whether it be in the primary season or the general election season, in addition to making sure that they understand that they can have the opportunity to provide a safe space for folks to come together and talk about the issues. Oftentimes find it very sort of off-putting that many of our churches don't want to have conversations about these issues, even when there are disagreements. So we try to sort of navigate that through the conference level by making sure that we're engaging our folks in those conversations. And if folks want to be engaged beyond a conversation, then, hey, we say, hey, come work with us. Let's meet up, build relationships with other UCC churches, clergy, and justice leaders within your local community. And let's figure out how we can bring together our collective base, stand in solidarity with those who have been being impacted by these issues, and partnering with them to bring about the change that so many people desperately need.
That's so true. And again, you both have really touched on the idea of relationship and story. And I often, will encourage people to, when they're talking about difficult issues, and it sounds like, you both have been doing this in your community engagement work. It's not so much about talking about, the statistics or, this particular, ideology, systemic approach, but to talk about stories and to say, here's the ways people are being impacted by, gun violence in our communities. Here's the way people are being impacted by food insecurity. And when you are able to share a story, there's something about sharing a story that's very different than sharing kind of a position or an ideology or a statistic. A story is just is hard to argue with. It may be very different from your own story, but it's somebody's story. And so you both, I think, have touched upon ways that by sharing stories with each other, whether it's within our congregations and then across the wider community, we can start to hear things and see realities that maybe we weren't seeing before. And so what might have seemed like a very abstract issue becomes a very personal one because someone has shared their story. And so I think that's so critical.
Yeah, and those stories hopefully will do more than just touch people. Doesn't mean they can empathize with them, but hopefully those stories would hopefully move them to action. And
absolutely,
what we're trying to do is sort of just provide a pathway through our Justice and Witness Action Network and our campaigns to say, hey, people in the pews, this is how you can take action on these issues. It's more than just doing a resolution. It's more than showing up for a march. It's more than writing a letter to your members of Congress. The totality of our justice work has to be more than that. And we need to understand what it means to be in deep relationship with impacted people. But not only that, how do we honor and support and recognize their agency to bring about change and bring our collective power and resources to combine it up to create a much more stronger base of power that could hopefully bring about the change that we're seeking to have happen. So it's really about being action oriented.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things that you point to, but you both point to, is that, in addition to voter registration, when we are able to engage in the issues and talking with the issues with each other, whether it's at the library or, out at a community center or wherever, these are the places where we can start being able to tell the stories that we need to bring to the candidates. We're really the ones who can hold the candidates' feet to the fire to say, especially now we're coming up into August, and that it's, now that we're doing more in-person events, there's more, campaign appearances, town halls, parades, that sort of thing. And so these are the places where we can, ask candidates, I have a neighbor down the street who is working 3 jobs and she still can't put food on the table for her kids. I want to know what are you going to do about this? Is this a priority for you? Or, my child has to do active shooter drills in school. What is your response to that? And we're the ones who can kind of bring these questions to them, whether they're local, whether they're local candidates, and could be school board candidates, it could be city council, whether it's state elected officials or federal. On all of those levels, really there has to be someone saying, what are your priorities? What are you going to do? You want my vote, or you want our votes, but where's your commitment to the common good and to the people behind those votes?
It's a way of empowering each other, by saying, by someone who's saying, hey, I'm working 3 jobs and I can't put food on the table. And then to say, I know it is right now, the disparities are, economic disparities are bigger than they've been. And so at least to say, hey, we have a voice in this, we have a way to address this, to say that your voice matters. So even in just the smallest way, we have a way to say, well, let's elect people that are going to help this situation.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. It's so true, Emily. Especially these days, we can feel really powerless. I mean, when we look at things like, the epidemic of gun violence, or, climate justice, it feels huge. It feels way beyond anything that any one of us can do. And it is beyond anything any one of us can do, but it's not beyond what, and Marvin, you were speaking to this, it's not beyond what we can come together to do collectively.
Right.
And so maybe even more so in a time when people feel like, I don't know what to do, the world is a mess, there's, giving some concrete things that here's some ways you can engage. And then once you do that, you may find some new other ways.
Yeah, we were able to effectively do that in the midst of a pandemic where we were all sort of under stay-at-home orders, by partnering with several of our strategic partners right here in our conference boundaries. And one of our principles of our Justice and Witness Action Network is coalitions and partnerships, the recognition that no one organization can do this work alone. So one of those organizations, Center for Common Ground, was actually led by one of our UCC leaders in the state of Virginia, through their programs and work that they do in many of the southern states. We were able to get many of our congregations participating in postcarding, to do voter outreach, to do phone banking, as well as texting. And as part of that work, we took it a step further this year, particularly in Virginia, to even reach out to our neighboring conference, the Southern Conference, to invite and manage to get the Eastern Virginia Association to sign on to be a participant of our Faith and Democracy campaign. So now in Virginia, we have a statewide effort that's happening where our churches are coming together regionally through our associations, the way they're designed, to do the voter outreach work collaboratively and together. So that sort of model is what we're trying to build across the conference, and we've been effectively been able to do that since 2020 as part of the campaign, starting with civic engagement and then carrying that over into the legislative advocacy at the state level, of course, and then of course back to the election cycle this year in our 2022 campaign efforts.
There's so many important pieces of that about you both have touched on. I mean, one thing is that you both remind me that I've heard it said that our friends and family are the most influential people in our lives in terms of whether or not we vote, and what things we care about. And so you don't have to be an expert. It's your friends. People want to know what their friends and family are thinking and what their friends and family care about, and what members of their congregation think about. And so being able to use that relationship, even if it's a long distance relationship. I'm a resident of the District of Columbia, and we don't have representation in Congress. So I rely a lot of times on my friends to say, hey, taxation without representation, that's happening right here in DC.
Well, we're renaming it. It's no longer called that name you stated. It's called the Douglas Commonwealth. That's right. What we're calling it.
There you go. But, kind of really taking, using those relationships as ways to, to get that message across and to make that happen. And I think too, just pointing to, what are some of the ways that, especially in these times when people are feeling disempowered, even if it's, and Emily, you alluded to this, if it's just the littlest things like a voter Bill of Rights card, or here's where you can get, just the simple information that can be really, really hard to find in all the noise of social media. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of disinformation, unfortunately. And our faith communities are trusted messengers. We're responsible messengers that people feel like they can go and get the information that they need. And so making sure that we're being true to that responsibility as being trusted messengers is just so very important.
Yep.
So I want to ask the question of how as we begin to wind down a bit and kind of think about the realities of the 2022 midterms, and we've already really kind of touched on some of them. I'm wondering from both you, Emily and Marvin, what do you think are in 2022? What do you think are the greatest challenges that are facing a robust voter turnout? And really, one might even say facing our democracy itself, when we look at things like the January 6th hearings and the state of our democracy. What would you say are some of the key challenges? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah, we attempted to, as you know, try to address that question back in May of this year, where we, in partnership with your office, Sandy, sort of launched our federal issues campaign, our first federal issues campaign around voting rights advancement and combating voter suppression. Our network voted overwhelmingly back in 2021 that they wanted this to be our issue that we work on at the federal level, since we're uniquely located near in our nation's capital. So I think voting rights advancement is it. And I think the one of the challenges is just, I think we've already been talking about it a little bit, is connecting people with trusted voices I hate to say it, bombarding them with constant messages and engagement about the importance of voting, registering to vote, of course, learning about the issues and the candidates and their positions on the issues so they can go and make an informed decision, and then journeying with them up until that early voting period. For those who now can vote by mail, journeying with them through that particular period and on election day to make sure that they follow through and vote, and support them in that process to make sure that they can cast their ballot and that their vote counts. So it's like we have to follow them all the way through adolescence to adulthood in this whole process of election. But I think that's critically important. And again, doing this work in partnership is what we're trying to do through our Faith and Democracy campaign, and recognize that, many of us have different ways in which we like to connect with people. So that's why we're happy that folks can still do postcarding this year. Folks can still do phone banking. Now that we can do things more in person, we're hoping that this year our voter registration effort is a little bit more robust as we get up for the general election period. So that's sort of what our focus is right now. And I think at the end of the day, it's about people having a sense of hope and recognizing that elections do matter,
Yes.
and they don't have to hold fast to any negative thoughts that they've had about the electoral process or the failure of current elected officials in fulfilling campaign promises, because this is a contact sport. I hate to use that analogy, but it is a contact sport, and it requires us to be constantly engaged at every level, not just during elections, but also during the process of public policy making.
Absolutely. And Emily, what are you seeing from where you are, from your perspective in Cleveland and your community? What are some of the big challenges that you think that we're facing to really get a robust engagement in the midterms?
It's something that I've spoken to, but I see it as the biggest hurdle, which is accessibility. But combined within that is a lack of information.
Yes.
And largely, I think I've seen in underhoused population, there's a lack of just kind of general like news information that's coming. And so often what gets spread is the word of mouth.
Right.
And that just goes like viral. And we all know, from that childhood game of telephone, that like through word of mouth, what you're often receiving is not maybe the most trusted or not trusted, but the most correct information.
Right.
And some of that is maybe because it's coming from only one news source, and we've all learned the value in looking at various news sources. Or it could just be because that's often like the most shocking information is the one that gets spread around the most. And I guess I'm making a simile in my mind to our efforts as a church for the COVID vaccine. Our church became a vaccination clinic, and I was surprised then that at the amount of disinformation, the amount
yes,
we engaged it. We talked with people and
yes,
said, are you interested? What are the reasons you do or do not? And I found that it was kind of off the wall stories, but it makes sense because that's the thing that they hear, and that's the thing that they communicated. But I found that the way to tackle that is to be one of those trusted sources.
Yes.
That when you build a relationship with people and then they start trusting you, when you say things, when you give information, and it doesn't work from like a top-down level. It works through this grassroots, building relationships, hearing people's stories, and then being able to kind of participate in the stories and the truth making that they're that they're engaged in.
I love that. I love that truth making. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we could go on for a long time, and but I do want to just note that as we're starting to draw to a close, among the things, we've really clearly identified that providing people with information and providing with the avenues to take action is so critical. And one of the things that we can do as communities of faith between now and the midterm vote is definitely to research, the laws in our state, and be given the fact that we have seen this wave, unfortunately, of voter suppression laws in the last 2 years. It's going to be even more critical for people, to know things like, I don't know how to find out when my polls open. I don't know if I can use a drop box or not. I don't know if there's a restriction on early voting. And so one of the things that we can do as faith communities is doing our homework, really, and going to the secretaries of state in our various states, because state election law varies by state. There's no comprehensive federal legislation. And so helping to provide that information, making little cards that, can be passed out to folks. That is a really powerful way, I think, to address the fear of voter suppression. So the way to kind of meet that is by information and good information. And I think you've both really spoken to that. And I guess the other piece I would say that I've appreciated from both of you is that I often tell people that the election day is the starting line. It's not the finish line. And Marvin, you talked about this a lot. It's we would, even after we cast our vote and we put elected officials into place, it's up to us to hold them accountable. And that's the long-term work of advocacy that we need to be engaged in, and that doesn't stop at the close of the polls on election day. That really starts at that point. So appreciate that. I'm so grateful for both of you. This has been an amazing conversation. So many, I think, points and ideas for people to pick up and run with. And I'm so very grateful for both of you for being here with us this afternoon. And would like to ask my colleague Marvin if you would be willing to pray us to a close. It's been an amazing conversation, just absolutely rich and robust, and so appreciate the two of you for being here today.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Jennifer. Let us pray. Good and loving God, we give you thanks for this time that you've allowed us to be intentional about the important work of making sure that people have the opportunity to cast their right to vote in this election season. May you continue, oh dear God, to order our steps as we seek to be faithful to the work of justice, and making sure, oh dear God, that those who oftentimes are attacked and not allowed to use their vote in this democracy, to have their say in this democracy, oh dear God, that we can continue to work to combat that voter suppression that is so prevalent and even coming in so many different ways from the state itself. Be with us, oh dear God. Give us courage, give us imagination, give us the ability to connect with those whom we haven't worked before, so our work can even be more powerful and reach more than we have done before. We give you thanks, all of this in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Siblings and sisters and brothers in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed into the rest of your day, and know that you are not alone, and we are holding you in prayer. Amen.